I didn't know what was inside my grandfather's final letter. But judging by the way my father reacted when the lawyer handed it to me, he already did. The room was full of relatives expecting an inheritance. Instead, they got a confession. Not from me, not from the lawyer, from Grandpa. And by the time that letter was finished, a secret that had been buried for years was sitting in the middle of the room for everyone to see. But to explain why, I need to start with the role my family assigned me long before any of this happened. I was the failure. I'm Ethan, 28 years old, and for most of my life, my family had a nickname for me. The failure, not to my face at first. That would have been too honest. Instead, it was the kind of thing I overheard when relatives thought I wasn't listening. The kind of thing that showed up in jokes during family dinners. The kind of thing everyone laughed at just long enough for you to know they meant it. My older brother, Daniel, was the golden child, straight A student, captain of the soccer team, business degree, perfect girlfriend, perfect job, perfect life. If Daniel walked into a room, people talked about his future. If I walked into a room, people talked about my mistakes. And to be fair, I wasn't exactly making it easy for myself. I struggled in college, changed majors twice, dropped out once, worked random jobs while trying to figure out what I wanted. Nothing criminal, nothing outrageous, just lost. But in my family, being lost was apparently worse than being anything else. Because they never let me forget it. At every birthday party, holiday gathering, and family barbecue, there was always a comparison. Ethan should learn from Daniel. Why can't you be more focused like your brother? Daniel already bought a house. Daniel already got promoted. Daniel already knows where he's going. Meanwhile, I was working at a small repair shop fixing electronics. I actually liked the job. The work was satisfying. The customers appreciated me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something. But according to my parents, I was still embarrassing them. I remember one Thanksgiving when my mother introduced me to a distant relative. This woman asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, my mother smiled and said, "Oh, Ethan is still figuring things out." Still figuring things out. I was 26, working full-time, paying my own bills, living independently, yet somehow I was still a project, still unfinished, still not enough. The only person who never treated me that way was my grandfather, Grandpa Henry. He wasn't a wealthy man, at least not visibly. He drove an old truck, wore the same jackets for years, never cared about status. But he had a way of looking at people that made you feel seen. Really seen, not judged, not measured, not compared, just seen. Whenever family gatherings became unbearable, I'd end up sitting with him on the porch. He'd hand me a soda and say, "So, kid, what are you working on these days?" Not what was wrong with my life. Not why I wasn't more successful. What I was working on, the difference mattered. I told him about repairing computers, starting side projects, learning new skills, things nobody else cared about. And he listened, actually listened. One afternoon, about 2 years before he died, he said something that stayed with me. "You know why most people stay unhappy?" I shrugged. He smiled. "Because they spend their lives trying to impress people who already decided not to be impressed." At the time, I laughed. But the older I got, the more I realized he was right. Nothing I did was ever going to be enough for my parents, because they didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to become Daniel, and those weren't the same thing. Then came Grandpa's 83rd birthday party, the day everything changed. The whole family was there. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, Daniel and his wife, everyone. Halfway through dinner, my father stood up with a drink in his hand and started giving a speech. At first it sounded normal, talking about family, talking about Grandpa. Then he started praising Daniel, again, talking about how Daniel represented the future of the family, how proud everyone was of him, how he was carrying on the family legacy. I remember looking around the table. Everyone nodded, everyone smiled. Then my father laughed and added, "At least one of my sons turned out right." The room exploded with laughter. Not nervous laughter. Not uncomfortable laughter, real laughter. The kind that happens when people genuinely think something is funny. I sat there smiling, pretending it didn't bother me, pretending my chest didn't feel like it had collapsed. And then I looked at Grandpa. He wasn't laughing, not even a little. He was staring directly at my father, the smile on his face completely gone. For the first time all evening, the room felt cold. And that's when Grandpa slowly put down his fork and said something that nobody in that family would ever forget. "Funny," he said quietly, "because you're not the son I'm proudest of." And suddenly the entire room went silent. The silence after Grandpa spoke felt endless. 1 second everyone had been laughing at me. The next, nobody seemed to know where to look. My father blinked. Daniel stopped smiling. Even my mother looked uncomfortable. Grandpa wasn't a confrontational man. In fact, in all the years I'd known him, I'd never seen him publicly criticize anyone, especially not family. So when he spoke, people listened. My father forced a laugh. "Dad, come on, we're just joking around." Grandpa didn't laugh. "I know exactly what you're doing," he said. The room somehow got quieter. My father shifted in his seat. "What does that mean?" Grandpa folded his hands together. "It means you've spent 20 years comparing your sons." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the air conditioner humming somewhere in the house. My father smiled nervously. That's not true. It is true. Grandpa's voice wasn't loud. That somehow made it worse. I've watched it happen since they were children. My mother jumped in. We only wanted what was best for them. Grandpa looked at her. No, the word landed like a hammer. You wanted one son? My mother's face immediately tightened. That's unfair. No, Grandpa replied. What's unfair is treating one child like a trophy and the other like a disappointment. I felt my stomach twist. Part of me wanted him to stop. Part of me wanted him to keep going forever. Because for once, somebody was saying out loud what I'd spent years feeling. My father looked around the room, probably hoping somebody would rescue him. Nobody did. You don't understand, he said. Daniel worked hard for everything he has. Grandpa nodded. He did. Then he pointed toward me. So did Ethan. Nobody said anything, because nobody had ever defended me before. Not like that, not publicly, not in front of everyone. It felt surreal, almost embarrassing. Like someone had turned on a spotlight I never asked for. My father scoffed. Ethan has spent years bouncing between jobs. I know, he dropped out. I know, he struggled. I know, Grandpa leaned back, and he kept getting back up. That hit harder than I expected. Because nobody had ever given me credit for surviving. They only noticed that I stumbled, not that I kept standing back up afterward. The conversation died after that. Nobody wanted to continue arguing with an 83-year-old man at his own birthday party. Dinner resumed, but the atmosphere never recovered. The laughter was gone. The jokes were gone. People suddenly found their food very interesting. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the family punching bag. I felt seen. A week later, Grandpa called me. Want to come by? Sure. I drove to his house that afternoon. The same small property he'd lived on for decades. The same porch where we'd spent countless hours talking. The same old truck parked in the driveway. Nothing looked different, yet something felt different. Almost like he had something important on his mind. When I arrived, he was sitting outside drinking coffee. He waved me over. Sit down, kid. I grabbed a chair. For a few minutes we talked about normal things, work, life, weather. Then he suddenly asked, do you know why I defended you? I laughed. Because somebody had to, he smiled. Partly. Then his expression became serious. Ethan, have you ever noticed how your family measures success? I shrugged. Money. Status, titles. Exactly. He pointed at me. And what do you measure? I thought for a moment. I don't know. Sure you do. I stared at him. He smiled. You measure people. I frowned. What does that mean? It means you care about people more than appearances. I didn't know how to respond. Nobody had ever described me that way. Most people described me as underachieving, unfocused, average. Not someone worth admiring. Grandpa continued. Do you know who visited me every week after your grandmother died? I looked down, because I knew, me. While everyone else had gradually returned to their own lives, I'd kept showing up. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 15 minutes, sometimes just to help with groceries. I never thought much about it. He was my grandfather. That's what family was supposed to do. Apparently not everyone agreed. You never came because you wanted something, Grandpa said. You came because you cared. His voice softened. And that matters more than you think. A strange feeling settled in my chest, pride, not because I had accomplished something impressive, but because someone I respected genuinely valued the kind of person I was, not the kind of person my family wished I was. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Before I left, Grandpa handed me an old wooden box. What is this? Take it home. I looked at him. What's inside? He grinned. If I tell you that ruins the mystery, I laughed. You're impossible. That's what makes me fun. I put the box in my car and drove home. At the time, I had no idea that little wooden box would eventually destroy the image my family had built around themselves. Because hidden inside that box was evidence. Evidence that Grandpa had been quietly watching everything for years. Evidence that he knew exactly who people really were. And evidence that after he was gone, he had one final lesson planned for the entire family. A lesson none of us were prepared for, especially my parents. Because 6 months later, Grandpa Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep. And the moment the lawyer opened his will, the real chaos began. The phone call came at 6:17 in the morning. I still remember the exact time because it was one of those moments that permanently burns itself into your memory. When my phone rang, I was half asleep. The moment I saw my mother's name on the screen, I knew something was wrong. Nobody calls that early with good news. I answered immediately. Hello? For a second, all I heard was breathing. Then my mother spoke. Her voice sounded small, almost fragile. Grandpa passed away. The words hit me like a punch. Even though he was 83, even though I knew it would happen someday, even though he'd been having health problems, nothing prepares you for hearing those words. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor, unable to think, unable to speak, unable to process the fact that the one person who had always believed in me was gone. The funeral took place 4 days later. Hundreds of people attended. Something I hadn't expected. I knew Grandpa was respected. I just hadn't realized how many lives he'd touched. Former coworkers, neighbors, friends, people I'd never met. One after another, they told stories. Stories about kindness. Stories about generosity. Stories about favors he'd done without ever asking for anything in return. And as I listened, I realized something. The version of Grandpa I knew wasn't unique. He treated everyone that way. Helping people wasn't something he occasionally did. It was simply who he was. After the service, the family gathered for lunch, and that's when I started noticing something strange. People weren't talking much about Grandpa. They were talking about the will, not openly, not directly, but enough. Enough for me to notice. Enough for me to feel uncomfortable. My uncle whispered to another relative. Daniel spent 20 minutes discussing Grandpa's property. My father kept mentioning the estate. The estate. As if the man hadn't even been buried yet. I tried ignoring it, but the conversations continued. Eventually Daniel sat beside me. You know Grandpa's land is probably worth a fortune now. I looked at him. Our grandfather died 3 hours ago. He seemed annoyed. I'm just saying. That was the moment I realized something. Some people were grieving Grandpa, others were calculating. A week later, the family received notice from the attorney. The will would be read the following Friday, and suddenly everyone seemed very interested in attending. The lawyer's office was packed. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, Daniel, me, every chair occupied, every face tense, waiting, expecting. The attorney introduced himself and opened a folder. Before we begin, your grandfather left a personal statement. The room became silent. The lawyer started reading. To my family, if you're hearing this, then I'm finally gone. First, stop arguing. I know some of you are already arguing. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. The attorney continued. I spent my entire life watching this family grow. I've seen kindness, I've seen selfishness, I've seen generosity, and I've seen greed. The room somehow became even quieter. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. The lawyer kept reading. Money has a strange way of revealing who people truly are. What happens after this letter will tell everyone exactly who they are. The attorney paused, then turned the page. The inheritance distributions began. My grandfather had set aside money for various relatives. Some received modest amounts. Others received personal items. Jewelry, photographs, family heirlooms, everything seemed normal. Then they reached Daniel. My brother sat up straighter. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Daniel receives $20,000. Daniel looked surprised, not happy. Surprised, because I think he expected more, much more. My father frowned, my mother frowned. Several relatives exchanged confused glances. Then came my parents. They received $15,000 each. Again, confusion. Again, disappointment. Again, those strange expressions people get when reality doesn't match expectations. My father finally interrupted. What about the property? The attorney looked down. We're getting to that. The room instantly became attentive, because everyone knew the property was the real prize. Grandpa's land sat in an area that had rapidly increased in value. Developers had been buying nearby properties for years. The land alone could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Everyone knew it. Everyone wanted it. The attorney turned another page, then he looked directly at me. My stomach dropped. For Ethan. The room turned toward me, every single face, every eye, every expectation. The attorney continued. I leave my home, land, workshop, investment accounts, and remaining assets. Silence, complete silence. Then he finished the sentence. To my grandson Ethan. The room froze. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The lawyer repeated it. Every major asset. Everything to me, not Daniel, not my parents, not divided equally, me. The silence lasted several seconds, then chaos erupted. What? That can't be right. There must be a mistake. My father was already standing. Daniel looked completely stunned. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. The attorney calmly held up his hand. There is no mistake. Then he reached into the folder. Your grandfather anticipated these reactions. The room immediately quieted. The attorney pulled out a sealed envelope. On the front, written in Grandpa's handwriting, were 5 words. For Ethan to read aloud. And suddenly every person in that room was staring at me, because whatever Grandpa had written next, he wanted the entire family to hear it. My hands were shaking as I took the envelope, not because of the money, not because of the property. Honestly, I still hadn't processed any of that. I was staring at Grandpa's handwriting. The same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and random notes he'd leave around his house. Only this time, it was the last thing he would ever say to us. The room was completely silent. Even the relatives who had been arguing seconds earlier weren't speaking anymore. The attorney nodded toward me. You may read whenever you're ready. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long. The moment I recognized Grandpa's words, my chest tightened. I took a deep breath and started reading. To my family, if Ethan is reading this, then my plan worked. That line immediately caught everyone's attention. Several relatives exchanged confused looks. I continued. Before anybody complains about my decisions, I want you to understand something. This inheritance was not based on who needed the money most. It was not based on who earned the most money. It was not based on who had the best career. It was based on character. The room became painfully still. I kept reading. For years, I listened to people talk about success. Some of you believed success meant promotions. Some believed it meant expensive houses. Some believed it meant being admired by strangers. You are free to believe those things. I do not. My father's jaw tightened. I noticed it immediately. So did everyone else. I continued. I believe success is revealed when nobody is watching. How you treat people who can do nothing for you. How you behave when there is nothing to gain. How you act when kindness is inconvenient. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even looked comfortable anymore. Then I reached the next paragraph, and suddenly I understood exactly where this was going. After your grandmother died, I became very lonely. Many people promised to visit. Most stopped coming after a few weeks. Life became busy. Excuses became easy. I do not blame anyone for that, but I noticed. Several relatives lowered their eyes. I kept reading. For nearly 6 years, one person continued showing up. My throat tightened. I already knew who he meant. Everyone else did too. Not because he wanted money, not because he expected rewards, not because he thought I was wealthy. He came because he cared. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. I hated it. I wanted to disappear, but I kept reading. Sometimes Ethan visited for hours, sometimes for minutes, sometimes just to ask if I needed groceries, sometimes just to make sure I wasn't alone. My vision blurred slightly. I swallowed hard. The room remained silent. Then came the part that changed everything, the part nobody expected, including me. Many people in this family think I didn't notice what happened during family gatherings. I noticed everything. The air felt heavier. I continued. I noticed the jokes. I noticed the comparisons. I noticed how often Ethan was treated like a disappointment. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I noticed because I was once treated the same way. That sentence shocked everyone, even me. I looked up briefly. Several relatives appeared genuinely confused. I continued reading. When I was young, my brother was considered the successful one. I was considered the mistake. People measured him by achievements. People measured me by failures. Eventually, I learned something important. The people keeping score are often terrible judges. The room felt frozen, like nobody wanted to breathe too loudly. Then came the paragraph that hit hardest. Ethan spent years being told he wasn't enough. Yet he remained kind. He remained generous. He remained loyal. Many people become bitter after being treated unfairly. He did not. I had to stop reading for a moment. Not because I was emotional, although I was, but because nobody had ever described me that way before. Not once. Not in 28 years. The only voice I'd heard for most of my life was criticism, failure, disappointment. Potential wasted. Never this, never kindness, never loyalty, never character. I took another breath and continued. Then Grandpa delivered his final blow. The one nobody in that room was prepared for, to my son. The room immediately focused on my father. You spent years trying to turn Ethan into Daniel. You never realized Ethan's greatest strength was being Ethan. My father looked physically uncomfortable. I had never seen him look that way before. Not embarrassed, exposed. The difference mattered. I kept reading. You taught one son that achievement creates value. You accidentally taught the other son that people have value even without achievement. Only one of those lessons survives difficult times. Nobody dared interrupt. Nobody dared move. The silence felt endless. Then I reached the final page, the final message, the reason Grandpa had left everything to me, and the sentence that would completely destroy the image my family had built for decades. The property, investments, and remaining assets belong to Ethan because I trust him. Not because he is perfect. Not because he is successful. Not because he earned the most money. Because character matters when nobody is watching. I swallowed hard. Then I read the last paragraph. Money reveals people. If anyone becomes angry after hearing this, pay close attention. You will learn exactly what they loved more, me or what I owned. The room went completely silent. One final sentence remained. The very last thing Grandpa ever wrote. Ethan, stop trying to earn approval from people who decided years ago not to give it. Live your life, you already have my respect. I lowered the letter, and for several seconds nobody said a word, nobody. Then my father slowly stood up, his face was red, his hands were clenched. And I realized immediately that he wasn't grieving. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't hurt. He was angry. Because Grandpa had done something far worse than leave me the inheritance. He had told the truth in front of everyone. And my father was about to prove Grandpa right. The moment I lowered Grandpa's letter, the room sat in complete silence for about 5 seconds. Then my father exploded. "This is ridiculous." His voice echoed through the attorney's office. Nobody looked surprised. In fact, most people looked like they'd been expecting it. The attorney remained calm. My father wasn't. "You're seriously telling me Dad left everything to Ethan?" The attorney nodded. "That is exactly what the will states." My father pointed at me. "Him?" There was something about the way he said it that hurt more than I expected, not because I wasn't used to it, because I was. It was the fact that even after hearing Grandpa's entire letter, he still looked at me like I was somehow less deserving. Like the answer should have been obvious. Like nobody in their right mind would choose me. Daniel finally spoke. I think everyone needs to calm down. That sounded reasonable for about 3 seconds. Then he added, Grandpa was old, maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. The room immediately reacted. Several relatives frowned. Even some people who had expected to inherit more looked uncomfortable. Because accusing a dead man of incompetence wasn't exactly a great look. The attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Henry underwent multiple evaluations during the preparation of this will. Daniel frowned. What? The documents include medical assessments confirming he was fully competent. Daniel sat back down. Clearly not expecting that answer, my mother tried a different approach. Ethan knows Grandpa wouldn't have wanted this. I stared at her. What does that mean? She smiled weakly. You know family should share. Family should share, interesting. Because family hadn't shared much when I was the one being humiliated for years. But apparently family values become very important when money appears. I didn't say that out loud. Not yet. Instead I asked, so you're saying Grandpa didn't mean what he wrote? My mother looked trapped, because the answer was obvious. The letter couldn't have been clearer. The attorney interrupted. There is one additional matter. Everyone immediately looked at him. My father seemed hopeful, like maybe there was some hidden clause that would save the day. There wasn't. But there was something else, something nobody expected. The attorney opened another folder. Approximately 8 years ago, your grandfather purchased additional land. The room looked confused. Additional land? I looked confused too. Nobody had ever mentioned that. The attorney continued. The purchase was made through a holding company. Now people looked interested, very interested. My father leaned forward. What land? The attorney slid a map onto the table, and suddenly the room changed. Because whatever people expected to see, it wasn't this. The highlighted property covered a massive area behind Grandpa's existing land, much larger than anyone realized. I blinked. What am I looking at? The attorney adjusted his glasses. Your grandfather quietly acquired neighboring parcels over several years. My uncle nearly choked. What? The attorney nodded. The combined property is substantially larger than public records would suggest. The room erupted with whispers. People immediately pulled out phones, started calculating, started estimating, started realizing something. Grandpa had been far wealthier than anyone thought, far wealthier. Then came the real bombshell. The attorney pointed toward a section of the map. 6 months ago, a commercial development proposal was submitted for this area. Nobody spoke. The attorney continued. Several developers have already expressed interest. I could practically hear the calculations happening inside people's heads. My father looked pale. Daniel looked pale. My mother looked pale. Because suddenly this wasn't just Grandpa's house anymore. This wasn't just family property. This was potentially life-changing money. The attorney calmly delivered the number. The current estimated value exceeds $4 million. The room exploded, literally exploded. People started talking over one another. Questions came from every direction. 4 million? That's impossible. Are you serious? What? I just sat there, stunned, because I hadn't been expecting $20,000. I certainly wasn't expecting 4 million. My father slowly turned toward me. And that's when I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not financial fear, control fear. The fear of realizing the person you've spent years looking down on suddenly has all the power, and absolutely no reason to listen to you. The meeting eventually ended, not peacefully, not even close. Relatives formed little groups, whispering, arguing, speculating. The attorney handed me several folders and business cards. People suddenly wanted to talk to me. People who hadn't cared much about me before. Funny how that works. As I walked toward the parking lot, Daniel caught up with me. Ethan, I stopped. What? For a moment he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Then he smiled. A smile I hadn't seen in years. A fake one, the kind people use when they want something. We should talk. There it was, the real reason. I laughed. No. His smile disappeared. What do you mean no? I mean no. Daniel stared at me. Then lowered his voice. We're brothers. I almost laughed again, because for most of my life being brothers only seemed important when it benefited him. Now suddenly it mattered. Interesting timing. I'll call you later, he said. No, you won't. His expression hardened. The nice act vanished instantly, and in that moment I finally understood something. Grandpa's letter wasn't really about money. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was about revealing people, showing who they really were, and already the masks were slipping. But the biggest surprise came 3 days later, because while sorting through Grandpa's paperwork, I found a locked file cabinet in his workshop. Inside were years of documents, letters, receipts, contracts, notes, and one folder labeled with 3 words written in black marker, for ETHAN. Only when I opened it, I discovered Grandpa had been keeping a secret for nearly a decade. A secret about my parents. A secret that explained why he stopped trusting them, and a secret that was about to tear the family apart completely. 3 days after the will reading, I found myself standing inside Grandpa's workshop. Alone. The building smelled exactly the same as it always had. Sawdust, motor oil, old wood, coffee. The scent instantly brought back years of memories. As a kid, I loved being there. While everyone else watched television or sat inside talking, Grandpa and I would spend hours in that workshop. Fixing things, building things, talking about life. Back then, I thought the workshop was his favorite place. Now I realized it had also been his hiding place. Because behind a row of storage shelves, I discovered a locked filing cabinet. At first, I assumed it contained tax records, property documents, normal paperwork. Then I noticed something strange. The top drawer had a label, for ETHAN. Only my stomach immediately tightened. Why would Grandpa leave something specifically for me? I used the key the attorney had given me and opened the drawer. Inside was a thick folder. Hundreds of pages, notes, letters, bank statements, property records, photographs. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. Then I found a handwritten note clipped to the front. Ethan, if you're reading this, then I am gone. I hope I'm wrong about what happens next. But I don't think I am. Before you make any decisions regarding the property, there is something you need to know. The note continued. Several years ago, I discovered something that changed the way I viewed certain members of our family. My pulse immediately increased. I kept reading. I never told you because I didn't want to burden you with it while I was alive. Now you deserve the truth. I sat down, suddenly very aware that whatever came next mattered. A lot. I turned the page and immediately froze because the next document contained my father's signature, followed by my mother's. Then several emails, several proposals, several contracts, and slowly the story started coming together. About 9 years earlier, developers had approached Grandpa about selling his land. The offer was substantial, life-changing money. Even back then, Grandpa wasn't interested. He loved the property, he wanted to keep it. Simple, case closed, or at least it should have been, except someone else had different plans, my parents. I kept reading. The documents revealed that they had secretly met with developers multiple times, without Grandpa's knowledge, without his permission, attempting to negotiate future deals involving property they didn't even own. I blinked. Read it again. Then read it a third time, because it sounded insane. But the paperwork was clear, meeting notes, emails, draft agreements, everything. My parents had been trying to position themselves to control the sale once Grandpa died. Years before he actually died, my stomach twisted, but it got worse, much worse, because then I found a handwritten note from Grandpa. The first time I discovered this, I convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. The second time, I became concerned. The third time, I understood exactly what was happening. I continued reading. They weren't waiting for me to make a decision. They were waiting for me to die. I stared at the page, unable to process it. Because no matter how difficult my relationship with my parents had been, that sentence felt brutal. Then I found the evidence. Email chains discussing future inheritance management, property projections, estimated timelines. Timelines, they had literally discussed timelines for Grandpa's death. Not directly, not explicitly, but close enough to make my skin crawl. And according to Grandpa's notes, that was the moment everything changed. That was when he stopped trusting them. That was when he started restructuring his estate. That was when he quietly began transferring assets into the holding company. That was when he decided the property would never pass through their hands. Not ever. Suddenly everything made sense. The hidden land purchases, the secrecy, the will, the letter, the inheritance. None of it happened suddenly. Grandpa had been planning this for years. Then I reached the final page. The page that hit hardest. Ethan, I don't expect you to hate anyone after reading this. Hatred is heavy. Life is easier without carrying it, but I do expect you to understand something. Trust is earned. And once broken, it rarely returns unchanged. I swallowed hard. Then read the final paragraph. The property belongs to you because I trust your judgment, not because I believe you'll make perfect decisions. Because I believe you'll make honest ones. There is a difference. At the bottom sat his signature. The last thing he would ever write to me. I stared at it for several minutes, thinking, processing, trying to understand how someone could believe in me so completely. Then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Dad, of course. I let it ring. Then it rang again and again. And again, finally I answered. What? No greeting, no small talk. Just what? There was silence for a moment, then he spoke. We need to meet. Not can we meet? Not would you be willing to talk? Need. I almost laughed. No, his voice hardened. This isn't a joke anymore. I looked at Grandpa's documents spread across the table. No, it isn't. The silence that followed felt different, like he knew something had changed, like he sensed I knew more than he expected. Then he said something that confirmed it, something he immediately regretted. Your grandfather never understood the whole story. My heart stopped, because I hadn't mentioned the documents. I hadn't mentioned the folder. I hadn't mentioned anything. Yet somehow, Dad already knew exactly what I had found. And suddenly I realized our next conversation wasn't going to be about the inheritance. It was going to be about the secret he'd spent nearly a decade hoping would stay buried. The moment my father said, "Your grandfather never understood the whole story," I knew. He knew exactly what I had found. And he knew there was no point pretending otherwise. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question, the one I already knew the answer to. "What story?" Silence, a long silence. Then my father sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they're trying to buy time. Finally, he spoke. "Meet me tomorrow." I looked down at Grandpa's folder, the contracts, the emails, the meeting notes, the years of evidence. "No, Ethan, no." My voice came out sharper than I expected. "If you have something to say, say it now." Again silence. Then he lowered his voice. "Not on the phone," and he hung up. The next morning I woke up to 15 missed calls, 8 from my father, 4 from my mother, 3 from Daniel. Not a single voicemail. That told me everything. People leave voicemails when they want to explain. People repeatedly call when they want control. I ignored them. Around noon, another call came, this time from my aunt. One of the few relatives I actually liked. I answered, "Ethan?" "Yeah, you should probably hear their version," I laughed. "Their version?" She hesitated, then quietly said, "Just don't expect honesty." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" There was a long pause, then she said something I never expected. "Your grandfather wasn't the only one who knew." My stomach dropped. "What?" She sighed. "Ethan, half the family knew your parents were trying to position themselves for the property." I sat upright. "What?" The word came out louder this time. My aunt continued. "They never openly talked about waiting for Grandpa to die. But everyone knew what they were doing." I couldn't believe it. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because nobody wanted the drama." I almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. Nobody wanted drama, so instead they allowed it to grow for nearly a decade. Amazing. That evening I agreed to meet my parents, not because I wanted to, because I needed answers. We met at their house. The same house where I'd spent years being compared to Daniel. The same dining room, the same furniture, the same family photographs. Only this time something felt different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't there seeking approval. I was there seeking truth, and those are very different things. My father sat across from me, my mother beside him. Daniel leaned against the wall. Nobody looked comfortable. Finally, Dad spoke. "You found the documents." Not a question. A statement. I nodded. His shoulders dropped. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "I never wanted your grandfather hurt." I stared at him. "That's your defense?" His jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "Then explain." For several moments he said nothing. Then finally the story came out. Years ago, developers had approached multiple family members, not just Grandpa, everyone. The numbers being discussed were enormous. Enough money to change several lives. According to Dad, he believed selling the property was the smart decision, the practical decision, the financially responsible decision. Maybe he even genuinely believed that, at first. But somewhere along the way, practicality became entitlement. Entitlement became expectation, and expectation became obsession. The property stopped being Grandpa's land. In Dad's mind, it became future money. Money he was already counting before it existed. I looked him directly in the eye. "Did you discuss what would happen after he died?" Silence. That was answer enough. Still, I waited. Finally, he nodded. A tiny movement, barely visible, but enough. And somehow that hurt more than any denial could have. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel spoke for the first time all evening. "You weren't supposed to get everything." I turned toward him. "What?" His face was red, frustrated, angry, not at our parents, at me. "I spent years helping Grandpa." I blinked. Helping? Daniel visited maybe 6 times in the last several years. Grandpa had told me that himself. I realized what Daniel meant. Not actual help, expected help. The kind people imagine they deserve credit for, the kind that exists mostly inside their own heads. He continued. "I did everything right." There it was, the real issue. Not fairness, not family, not grief, not love. A scoreboard. Daniel believed life worked like a scoreboard. Good grades, good job, good house, good reputation, reward earned. Grandpa had shattered that belief. And Daniel couldn't handle it. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out Grandpa's letter, and placed it on the table. Nobody touched it. Nobody looked at it because they'd already heard it. They just didn't like what it said. I stood up, slowly, calmly, and for the first time in my life I said exactly what I felt. "No matter what I did, it was never enough for you." Nobody interrupted. "You wanted me to become Daniel." My mother started crying. I kept going. "You spent years treating me like I was broken because I wasn't him." My father's eyes dropped toward the floor. "You never asked who I wanted to be." Silence, heavy silence. The kind that arrives when everyone knows you're telling the truth. Then I smiled. Not an angry smile, not a revenge smile, a peaceful smile. Because for the first time in my life, I genuinely understood something. I didn't need them to agree. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to suddenly become different people. Grandpa had already given me what I needed. Validation, respect, belief. The things I'd spent years chasing from the wrong people. And suddenly the weight I'd carried for most of my life disappeared. Not because I inherited money, because I inherited certainty. The certainty that I was never the failure they claimed I was. I never had been. As I walked toward the door, Dad finally spoke. "Ethan," I stopped, not turning around, just listening. His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What happens now?" I thought about that for a moment, then answered. "Now," I smiled. "Now I go live my life." And for the first time, I meant it.